introduce you to Nithya Raman, who's the LA City Council member, District 4, which Encino is part of. Nithya is an urban planner and mother of two, an immigrant to America, member of the LA City Council representing this district. She ran in 2020 and won a historic victory in becoming the first Asian American woman and the first South Asian ever to serve on the LA City Council. And she was reelected to a second term in March of 2024. And since taking office, I think her resume is very interesting for the conversation we're going to have now. She's prioritized delivering people-centered and effective services for people experiencing homelessness, building more affordable housing, and moving with greater urgency to meet our city's climate goals. She is chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee and vice chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Governance Reform. She also represents LA on the governing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And without taking up too much time with the resume, welcome, Nithya. Thank you to our group.
Yes. Nice to meet you.
Yes, very nice. And you can either hold it or...
I'll keep it there. Okay. I'm very short, so... Okay, well, thank you so much, Joel. Sorry I was late. I was just on a long meeting this morning. But yes, I'm the council member for the 4th District. My name is Nithya. The district is huge. Do you all live in, do you know if you live in the 4th District? You may not know. Okay, so it goes from northern Silver Lake, Los Feliz, Hollywood Hills, Griffith Park to Franklin Canyon. Doesn't include Franklin Canyon. Most of Studio City, Sherman Oaks, the bottom sliver of Van Nuys, Encino, and half of Reseda. I know, tiny little me represents all of that. 260,000 constituents. So do any of you live in any of those neighborhoods? Okay, great. So I might be your council member because I don't represent all of Studio City and I don't represent all of Reseda and I don't represent all of Silver Lake. But if you live in any of those neighborhoods, I might be your representative. So I'm very, very delighted to meet you. And I'm really delighted to be here. This is, I've spoken to a bunch of senior groups during my time in office. And I'm an urban planner by training. I have a degree in urban planning from MIT. And I started in politics 4 years ago. I got elected for the first time out of my volunteer efforts. I was a volunteer in my neighborhood on the issue of homelessness because I saw more tents. I live in Silver Lake. I saw more tents on the streets of Silver Lake than I had seen before. So I got together with a few people. I joined my neighborhood council. And through that volunteer work, I got really inspired to get more civically engaged. I got really frustrated with my local elected representative. And then, I don't know, I was trying to leave a bad job. So I ran against him. And I didn't think I would win because he was an incumbent and he'd raised a lot of money, but I ended up winning anyway, which was really exciting. And I think it's because my message was one of active response. I talked about the problems that the city was facing, and I said I would be active in responding. I wouldn't just complain about the system, I would try and work to fix it. And on homelessness, I saw a real opportunity to do that. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that we've done in my first term, and then I'll talk a little bit about homelessness specifically and some of the work that I've been doing over the last year. Joel told me that this was a very academic group. Enlightened, yes, okay. And so I want to get into a little bit of the weeds with you, the policy weeds, the data weeds that I've been getting into over this last year, and then I'll open it up for questions if that sounds good. So I've done a lot of things in my 4 years in office, my first term. I'm starting my second term now, that I'm really proud of. One of the things that I had to do, so I became the chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee when the tapes leaked. You remember that? Delightful time in our city's history. And I had to undo a lot of the COVID tenant protections that had been in place for many, many years, even long after the vaccines were in place, and I had to kind of undo those protections, but make sure that we were incorporating some of the lessons that we learned from COVID into our tenant protection system here. So I was able to pass some more thoughtful protections, including protections that helped renters to stay housed if they were just a few $100s behind in rent. They would still owe that money to their landlord, but unless they dropped below a month's rent, according to HUD's fair market rent, they couldn't be evicted from their homes. right? So it didn't mean you didn't owe that rent. You still had to pay it. Your landlord could still use all of the tools that they had in their toolbook to pay it. But unless you dropped below owing 1 month of rent, you couldn't get kicked out. And we learned that during COVID, that people got sick, missed a week of work, and in a city like Los Angeles, me and the rest of the city council decided that wasn't enough to make you lose your home, right? And we have a city which has historically high eviction rates. And so this was part of our effort to try and say, let's keep people housed as much as we can. We also, for the very first time through that process, got something that I think is the most important and valuable thing that we got out of that process, which was data. So for the first time, we never knew who was getting eviction notices. The courts got those notices, but the city never got them. So we could never target support to people who really needed it. For the first time, because of that legislation that I helped pass, a landlord that was sending an eviction notice in the city of LA had to also send a notice not just to the tenant, but also to the housing department. And so now using that data, the housing department, the mayor's fund, which is a nonprofit that's run by Mayor Bass, or run through Mayor Bass's office. It existed during Garcetti's term as well. And then council offices like mine use that information to do proactive outreach to the people who are most at risk of losing their homes. And we're able to do that because of this new requirement that we passed. And once we did that, we were really able to start targeting some of our scarce resources for eviction defense and rent relief to those people who are most at risk of losing their homes for the very first time here in the city of Los Angeles. So that was a really useful intervention that really changed the way in which we're able to be responding to our housing crisis, because we didn't just have to be reactive, we could also be proactive when we got that information, which was exciting. We also, in response to those tapes leaking, but actually I had put that piece of legislation forward beforehand, passed an independent redistricting process for the city of Los Angeles. So before you guys voted on this last November, and enough Angelenos supported it that it is now the law of the land, but before November, council members drew their own lines here in the city of Los Angeles for re-election. Now, that doesn't sound like a great system to me. And actually, what was happening on those tapes was actually a discussion about redistricting. So there was horrible racism, homophobia, terrible language, a deep kind of scorn for residents of Los Angeles displayed on those tapes that I think horrified everybody. But what they were talking about was how to redraw the line so that the 3 people on those tapes who were council members and their allies could get reelected. And we changed that. So I had put forward legislation in 2022. And finally, after the tapes leaked, the city council heard that legislation because there was real opposition to taking power away from council members and giving it to an independent redistricting commission. We worked on it through the ad hoc governance reform committee, and then we put it on the ballot in November, and a huge percentage of Angelenos voted for it. And now we have an independent redistricting process here in the city of Los Angeles. So I'm very, very proud of that. So those are 2 things that we did in my first term that I'm really excited about. We also did a lot on homelessness. So I wasn't, in my first term when I got there, there was a lot of big encampments in my district. And my district looked different when I first got elected, so I didn't have Encino for my first year. I only got it in 2022. But in my first year, there used to be big encampments across the entire district. So I don't know if you remember the one under the Coldwater 101 underpass. That was there for a long time. There was a huge one under the Van Nuys underpass. There was one in Studio City at the corner of Fruitland and Ventura. Do you know that huge Universal parking lot for the train station? There was a lot there for the Hollywood Bowl shuttle buses would park there. And there used to be a huge encampment there. There were fires there all the time. There was a limo that was parked there, a broken down limo. And I'm sure you remember all of these encampments. And we worked to try and basically doing the same thing that we do for constituents who are housed. We were the squeaky wheel for the constituents who were on the street to make sure the broken system that we have here in the city of Los Angeles for addressing homelessness served to get them indoors and off the street. And we did that in a number of ways. We raised extra money. So we won the very first encampment resolution grant from the governor, and we actually just won our second one. I'm very proud of that. We raised money to get more hotel and motel vouchers that people could move into, because there's a huge shortage of shelter beds here in the city of LA. We only have a third of the shelter beds that we need for our homeless population, and so that's why so many people who are homeless are on the streets, very different from New York, which has a shelter bed for every person who's experiencing homelessness. And so they don't have the numbers of people on the streets that we have, but we have so many. And so we raised money, got motel and hotel vouchers. We converted a hotel into a long-term shelter in Hollywood and got 143 beds from that. So we really worked to increase the resources that we had available to residents who were experiencing homelessness here in our district. And then we spoke up. We were very loud, and we made sure that caseworkers were going out to those encampments day after day, week after week, and we got every single person in those encampments assigned to a bed, and then we got them indoors through that effort. And there were these dozen big encampments when I first got elected to office, and now none of those encampments are there. And as new encampments pop up again, which there's always more encampments, more people who are falling into homelessness, but this is the same process that we use every single time there is a new encampment that comes up. And so as a result of this system that we've put together in my district, where we work very hard, we have an extremely fragmented homeless services system, but our office really works hard to make sure that system works for the people in our district. And so through that kind of relentless effort, we have actually seen the number of people living on Council District 4 streets go down every single year that I've been in office. Including this last year in 2024, we saw a 40% reduction in the number of people living on the street in Council District 4. And every single year, we've done better than the rest of the city, which is really, really exciting. We saw increases in the rest of the city in some places, and then last year, for the first time, we saw a reduction citywide, thanks to Mayor Bass's work, but we saw an even bigger reduction in our district thanks to our efforts. This system is not perfect. It's not, it takes a long time to resolve encampments, but I think what we're demonstrating in the district is that if you can make the system out there work for the district, you can see real progress and you can monitor change over time in that. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing now as the chair, where I have an opportunity to look at this system citywide. Because I think we've seen a lot of headlines about the lack of accountability in the sector, right? You've seen a lot of headlines and even complaints over and over again from elected officials within the city. I have been part of that, being like, what are the outcomes of the dollars that are being spent? Where is my money going? I'm allocating money to shelter. How many people are in those shelter beds? How many people, when I fund an outreach team, how many times a week is that outreach team going out to an encampment on the street? How do I know that they're visiting every encampment, right? These are questions that you ask of every dollar that's being spent, and yet on homelessness, we just were not getting those answers at all, and it was very, very frustrating. So I have motion after motion that I kind of, put together. A motion is what, it starts off the legislative process here in the city of LA. And council members are legislators. We're not supposed to be executive officials. That's the mayor's responsibility. But as legislators, we can ask the system for answers. And so I did that. My fellow council members did that. And we just did not get answers. So I have actually, in preparation for this talk, looked at all of the motions that I had filed and saw, okay, no report back, no report back, no report back, when I was asking for data on all of these questions, right? And that's incredibly frustrating. And so I got, I would say, extra frustrated. And so I decided to do something that is not traditional for a council member here in our city, which was to take a little bit more of an engaged role operationally. So I convened a lot of the departments that were responsible for this. So we spend money on homelessness on 3 different buckets. We spend it on outreach, we spend it on shelter, and we spend it on permanent housing. That's things like Prop HHH that you guys passed to build new apartments for people experiencing homelessness, but we also fund things like short-term rental subsidies for 2 years that can help people get into a private apartment and just help them pay the rent, right? So we fund these 3 buckets of work. And so I convened all of the departments and agencies that were involved in this work in the city, and I said, who here amongst the CLA, CAO, housing department, housing authority of the city of Los Angeles, who is responsible for monitoring the performance of these investments? Who's charged with that in our city? And no one raised their hand. No one did. Because the way in which we have funded homeless services here in the city of Los Angeles is a system that has essentially defied accountability, because we fund LAHSA, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, that then subcontracts with a lot of homeless service providers. So if you're spending money to open up a shelter, the city of Los Angeles doesn't give that money to the shelter operator directly. We give it to LAHSA, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, and then that entity then contracts with the service provider. Why do we have this weird system? You may be wondering, it doesn't make any sense, right? We spend so much money on homelessness, why aren't we doing it directly? Well, it came out of a historical artifact. We didn't used to spend this much money on homelessness. 20, 30 years ago, our homelessness crisis was really confined to a couple of neighborhoods, mostly just Skid Row, Hollywood, and the beaches. And when the homeless crisis was smaller, it was still like 25, 30,000 people who were homeless then, but it was just out, not in Encino, not in Sherman Oaks, not in the Valley, you know. When it was much smaller, what we did was that we funded LAHSA to work with the county that provides social services. So the city doesn't provide social services, the county does, right? The county provides mental health services. The county provides health services. The city is not responsible for, nor is it funded to provide any of that. And there was a court case, and out of that court case about this issue emerged LAHSA as a joint powers authority to coordinate the spending between the city and the county when it was a smaller amount of money being spent. And that structure, an artifact of this court case, has remained in place all this time. And so now, even as we are spending more money, we are still dealing with this, to me, outdated structure, right? So what can we do about it? One of the things that I've been trying to do over this last year has been, once I started convening these departments and kind of pushing them to do more and work faster, was to actually get the data that we needed about outcomes so that we could say, this program is working and this program isn't. Let's put our money here. This program is doing the best it can, but it's meeting up against this barrier. We don't have the ability to say any of that right now. And so I started working with all of these agencies to actually get more data about outcomes. And for the first time here in the city of Los Angeles, we are actually getting that data, some of it. And it's helping us to see what is happening in the homeless services sector as a whole, right? Not just from our district, but for the city as a whole. And what we found are both sometimes alarming things, but also sometimes outcomes that show that things are working as they should, right? So I'll give you two different pieces of investment that we've put a lot of money into as a city. One is shelter beds, and the other is permanent supportive housing, what you built through Prop HHH. And I'll talk about the data that came out from both of those. So on shelter beds, we asked for the data, we didn't get it for a long time. And finally, that data started emerging, and what it showed was that a quarter of the shelter beds were empty on any given night. So we've now invested in thousands of shelter beds across the city, and on any given night, a quarter of those are sitting empty. Now, that is an alarming, oh my gosh, thank you so much. That's an alarming stat, right? Because you want every bed to be utilized on every given night. But we didn't know. We had no idea. As people who are funding the system, we had no insight into that kind of vacancy rate. There's some vacancy that will always be there in a shelter system, right? Because if a person is asking to come into shelter, the shelter provider will match them to that person, and then they'll go find them, right? So there'll be a couple days or maybe a week where you say, okay, I'm going to go get that person and bring them into shelter. So there'll always be some level of vacancy in the system just because of how you fill the beds. These aren't filled on a walk-up basis. They're filled through case managers and referrals, okay? But 25% is too much. But now we have the data, and so now we can actually start addressing it, which is really exciting. I also looked at the data for permanent supportive housing, and we just got that this last week, and we talked about it in our committee meeting, and we're going to talk about it again in our Wednesday committee meeting. So if you're really excited and interested in this, tune in at 2:30 on Wednesday. You can look at on our website. And what I found about permanent supportive housing is that we've funded now almost 10,000 units, where many more are coming online through the Prop HHH program. You remember that bond measure which was on the ballot in 2016? Yes, and I think many of you must have supported it because it passed with flying colors, and we are investing, it was a $1.2 billion bond that was supposed to build 10,000 units. Now we are close to getting those units online. We still have a couple more thousand to come online over this next year or two. And what I found out about the existing set of units is that we have about an 11% vacancy rate across that system, but that when units become vacant, they get filled up within about 90 to 100 days. And 11% is probably a little higher than we want. You know, we want closer to a 7% vacancy rate. Just that's kind of a good turnover vacancy rate system for any of these. But it's much better than what many people had thought, which was that thousands of units were lying vacant across the city. That's not the case, which is good. But what is happening is that when units open up or when new buildings come online, they're not getting filled up in 60 days or 90 days. They're taking longer than 6 months to get filled up. So when a new building opens up, those units lay vacant for a very long time. Again, we didn't know that as we were looking at this system, but now we know, and now we can actually start targeting these gaps in the system and start filling shelter beds much more effectively and start filling these units much more effectively as we go forward. But we weren't able to do that before because we had no visibility into it. So I guess my response to, I know that there's a lot of skepticism about the homeless services system as a whole. There's a lot of money being spent on it, and I think for people, the change on the streets has not been fast enough, right? They're not seeing the response that they need. And I want to just say two things in response to that. One is that your frustration with that system, believe me, I feel it in every molecule of my being, and every single person at City Hall is feeling it. And we've been talking about this. This is something that we grapple with all the time. And you know, I think it's going to take real work to get there, but I think we can make progress on it. But the second thing I wanted to say is that this is, in my history of working with the system, this is the first time that I have seen this kind of accountability and outcomes data coming forward. And I'm proud to say that that's because of my efforts and my work. And it is too slow. It's not, moving fast enough to meet the needs of Los Angeles. I understand that. And I know that taxpayers are fed up. But I do want to underscore that it's not going to change unless you have people like me, like people in the departments who are doing this work, really pushing on the system to fix the challenges that we're facing. And that's the work that I am committed to doing on an ongoing basis. I have support from other key actors within the system, including the council president and the mayor, for that work. Our work is supported by major foundations now. We have support from the California Community Foundation and others to do this. And I am excited about what we can do better as we move forward. And I hope that next year I can come back to you and say, look at this oversight system I've completely built out. Look at how we're serving your district. This is how many times outreach workers visited every encampment. Here's a map of encampments that existed 6 months ago. Here's what it looks like now. That's what I'm building. And I'm step by step, we are moving there. So I hope that wasn't too much in the weeds or too boring, but it's work that I don't talk about to the press. There's no press releases, there's no headlines about this because it's very dull behind the scenes work. But it is important for a group like this to understand that for those of you who are demanding accountability, that you have a very hard worker in City Hall trying to get you the accountability that you have always deserved. So, thank you.
Oh, we have several questions. Can I just ask one before I open up? Council member, the temporary and whatever the next level was, seems like it's dealing with the sort of end product. What about the underlying causes of homelessness? The unaffordability of housing to begin with, jobs, mental health issues, etc. I mean, I don't know if that falls within your scope of the LA City, but those are the drivers. You're just dealing with sort of,
Yeah.
mopping up.
Yeah, I mean, sure. So, yes, housing affordability, I would say, is a result of council policies, or has been. I think it's a common problem across major cities in America right now, but housing affordability is definitely the biggest driver of homelessness across America right now. And I say this knowing that it generates pushback from people. Like, people are like, what about mental illness? What about drug use? If you look across cities and look at cities that have larger populations of people who are homeless and smaller populations of people who are homeless, the variable that explains that variation is housing affordability, right? There is not different levels of mental illness across communities. There's a lot of mental illness. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of drug use across jurisdictions. You're saying no, there isn't? Okay, I mean. Okay. Okay. There's a lot of drug use out there, and the drugs are getting more potent. They're acting in ways that we don't really understand, and then they're overlapping with mental health issues and making those more acute, right? There is some real challenges that we're dealing with, but those challenges are not unique to Los Angeles. They're not the explanatory variable for why we see so much homelessness in this city. The explanatory variable is housing affordability. And what can the city do about that? Well, one thing is that we can build more affordable housing and build more housing overall, because there's a housing shortage here in the city of Los Angeles that has been the case for a very, very long time. And I have done work on building more affordable housing. I've done work on building more housing overall. But it's not enough. We have to do a lot more. We're still in a huge, huge housing shortage here in the city. On mental illness and drugs, I want to go back to what I said before, which is that the county is responsible for providing mental health services for people who are on Medi-Cal, and substance abuse services for lower income residents who without private insurance. And so we depend on the county to provide those services for people who are both on the street and in our shelter system. But we have a lot of trouble getting those resources that we need from the county, a lot. So I would encourage all of you to also talk to your county board of supervisors. Tell them how important it is that they hold their departments accountable. Because part of what we're challenged with is, if I have somebody who is on the street, who is obviously struggling with mental health issues, obviously, I call the Department of Mental Health, or my staff does, and we ask them to come out, right? They may not come. I had a situation where we had an emergency on the street where someone was hitting themselves on the head. The back of their head was bleeding, okay? And they're sitting on a sidewalk screaming. You know, you've seen this before. You've seen this situation before. My staff was on site with them. They called the emergency response system for the Department of Mental Health. They called the direct line. We were told that nobody would come out for a minimum of 8 hours, maybe 2 days. If somebody is undergoing a mental health crisis, that is not a timeline that works for them. It just doesn't work. It makes zero sense. And so we have a real problem with our mental health system that I engage with the county to try and make better, that I'm pushing to resolve, and where the city now is forced to spend more money to fill those gaps through things like emergency crisis response teams that we now fund because the mental health department, which we all pay into as well, doesn't send out those teams fast enough, right? So we are not dealing with a good system there, but, you know, again, I can talk to you more about how we can make it better.
I'll shorten my question because you answered a lot of what I was going to ask you about.
Okay.
Certainly, there, you know, those that are housing issues that usually, hopefully, are short-term regarding housing needs and eventually do better, and those that have long-term, you know, recidivism because of mental health issues and drug abuse. My question though is, you've developed housing in motels and areas for people, and I'm wondering if those should be for the people who have short-term housing issues. Are they being used at all for the people who are drug addicts or on mental health? Because that's in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I don't think there's one, we don't have a site here in Encino yet. I think there's maybe one proposed, which is a youth site at, I think it's on Ventura. Do you know where it is?
There's a motel I saw Encino on Ventura Boulevard, Encino Avenue and Louise.
Which?
There that's apparently going to be taken over. I'm curious.
Oh, the Oak Tree. That's what I was talking about. Yeah, so that's the youth. That's the youth one. That's what I was talking about. So it's targeted to transition age youth who are between 18 to 24. It hasn't opened yet, though, right? It's just funded, and it's going through the process of opening yet. But you don't have a hotel like that here in Encino yet. I have one in my district in Hollywood, which we operate. You are right. There are real challenges with how we bring people into these hotel and motel rooms. One thing that I will say is that, let's say you're trying to get mental health services for somebody, it is easier to get mental health services into a shelter site than it is to try and get mental health services to somebody who's on the street because of the lack of visibility there. And what my hope is that even if someone with mental health issues were to be taken into one of these sites, that we would be able to basically transfer them to an appropriate bed as quickly as possible. And that's kind of that's a system that we should be setting up, right? Because when you're moving people indoors through an encampment resolution operation, mental health services are on site there, but it is not always easy to differentiate between two different subpopulations that you're talking about, right? Well, there's not enough facilities for everybody. Yes, that's right. Yeah. But you know, we've operated the site in Hollywood for a long time. I also have another temporary shelter that we operate in on the corner of Riverside and Los Feliz, as well as another family shelter also in the Silver Lake, Los Feliz area. And we have 2 women's sites in Hollywood as well, that all of which are in the district. And so far, the kinds of safety issues for the community that you're discussing, we have not had at those sites. There have been issues within the sites where there have been conflicts between residents and people have been kicked out. When I was first elected, there was a row of tents outside of my shelter site, which I addressed. We brought everybody out of those tents, off that area, and we've kept that area completely clear outside, not just of that shelter, but of all of the shelters that I've talked about. So I think there is a way to open shelters and make sure that they don't impact the neighborhood around them. And I think the way that you do it is through the kind of relentlessness that I was talking about earlier. You have to provide oversight. You have to provide that accountability. And you have to hold service providers accountable not just for providing services for the people who are there, but also making those connections for people who need higher levels of care and advocating for them to get that. And that's really what we're trying to build out better, but we have not had the issues for surrounding communities. We have had issues inside the shelters themselves, which we have resolved and worked on and tried to resolve as best we could.
First of all, I want to commend your office because I've been working with them very closely since the city took over, and that's not related but is related. I'm talking about the garbage and recycling collection. Since the city gave monopoly to several companies nothing but problems. And I've been working with your office because after 40 years at the VA, and I learned from our patients to include the Congress people if they have a grant. So I called your office, Nicole and Hannah and some other people, and they have been facilitating for me to communicate with the company. Pardon? Yes. Yes, and you are on all my emails. So that's one thing, commendation. The other thing is that I came here with 2 agenda items. One was this one, but the other one was the homelessness. And I thought, oh, I will be unique because I will say, no, all we need is mental health. You know, the focus on housing is wrong. 40 years at the VA taught me, you know, mental health, and there has to be thinking of how to do mobile units that go to the streets. And so what I hear now that I'm preaching to the choir, and your choir too, and you too, right. I said, oh, you know, I'm going to, no, you understand. I'm telling you, I live in Sherman Oaks, right? Between Van Nuys, I work with my friend, we walk to Whole Foods. Between Van Nuys and Beverly Glen, there are a lot of closed shops, yes? Feces and remnants of bonfires and garbage. And I've been calling the office and they say, oh, trash cans that are turned on the street. And the other thing, it becomes, you know, we've been confronted by them, by some of the people. Not that they would do anything, but it feels unsafe, okay? So again, I know that, you know, your job is huge. I know that your office, they are trying, but they don't have the clout. And my suggestion, you know, there are places where they use mobile units to go to the streets and help those people. I go 40 degrees outside and this woman is in the street, you know, in front of the store. And the other thing is cleanliness, you know. Please, you know, make the services more frequent or more responsive to cleaning the streets.
Yes. Okay. So I want to just take up 2. So first of all, thank you for engaging with our staff. So I want to introduce Ricky here. Oh, I need a mic, sorry. Yes. Ricky is our Encino field deputy, and I will say even his toughest customers love Ricky because of his responsiveness and his commitment to the community. So if you don't know Ricky already, please get to know him. And we have a lot of wonderful people like Ricky working in our office. Our Sherman Oaks field deputy, we have Nicole Alaverdian, who you've been engaging with, who's great. We also have Taline Kiroglian, who's also a Sherman Oaks field deputy. In Studio City, you'll be dealing with Sydney Liss, who actually grew up in Encino. And in the Hollywood Hills, it's Jonathan J. Anderson. And so we have really a great team that's working to address your issues, and we won't know about the issues unless you tell us. So we're always grateful to hear from you, and just want to say that we try hard to resolve issues. We also pay for, in addition to sanitation services, we also pay for 2 clean teams from a nonprofit called LA Conservation Corps. Sorry, LACC, I could only remember the initials. LA Conservation Corps, which go out, so if you call the office on a work day and the next day is also a work day, and it operates through Saturday, so they work 6 days a week, and you tell us about bulky items or you tell us about a sanitation issue that needs to be addressed, we can actually schedule that team to come out and address issues faster than 311 can usually get to it. So try us, you know, we're sometimes able to resolve the cleanliness issues, but one thing that we've done with the clean teams, and I just wanted to share this with you, is if there's areas that are constant sites of illegal dumping, or if there's constant issues, like if there's, you know, trash there but there's no tent, right? Someone's just passing through. if it's a commonly used site, we can still have the sanitation teams put it on their weekly or biweekly rotation. So hopefully we can get you that cleaner street, even if we're not able to always say, no one can be here, no one can throw anything on the floor. We want to be able to address that. And finally, I just want to say, you talked about safety, and I'm a woman who walks around the city all the time. I have 2 little kids. I have 9-year-old twins who walk to school and who play with their friends in their neighborhood all the time on the streets. Our safety is of highest priority for me. And that's part of why I'm trying to get as many people off the streets as quickly as possible. That's part of why I have focused on this, and why our office has had success. And again, I know people are frustrated, but I do want to recognize when we've made progress. And we have made real progress. And I want to say that if there's issues that are causing you fear in your community, please reach out to us. We work really hard. You had a series of burglaries in Encino last year, and there was a cluster. Yes. And, some of the cluster, we've seen these across the entire city, and actually our district has fared better than others relative to those in the we've seen a rise of home burglaries in Los Angeles. Some of it has been driven by Chilean gangs. I don't know if you've been reading the headlines, but federal prosecutors have been arresting people. But there's more that we can do to address these clusters when they come up. And we know that people are planning in particular neighborhoods. And so if there is any issues that come up, please let us know, because we're able to bring more police presence. We had people, walking on horses, I think, during that time. We had a big community meeting. We had police presence that was much more visible when that was happening, and we were able to get it down. And this year, our numbers are much, much better than last year so far. So I'm really excited about that. Next question.
Hi, you mentioned the the Independent Redistricting Commission.
Commission.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do those people apply, and who decides how they get on it?
So we, luckily, in Los Angeles, have the benefit of years of redistricting commissions that have taken place across the state of California and across the entire country. We're not the first jurisdiction to do this, right? And so we're taking the wisdom from these other places and incorporating it into our work. So the way it works is there's a set of applications that come in to, I believe it's the city clerk's office that manages them. And as long as they meet a certain basic set of requirements about residency, and you have to make some declarations that you haven't worked in the office, in a council office or for an elected official within a certain period of time, that you're willing to be a resident of Los Angeles for a certain period of time, you get, from that pool, they pick X number. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact number. Then that pool then chooses from the rest of the applications, maintaining some level of geographic representation. So somebody from the Valley, somebody from the North Valley, somebody from the South Valley, and across the entire city, to make sure that the city geographically is represented and that there is some attention paid to demographic representation on that body. And this at random selection, then them picking the others, this is a model that's what the State Redistricting Commission uses for their process. That's what the county uses. And so it's kind of a tried and true way of ensuring that you have representative people who are not people who are insiders, basically. Because what happened now, we have a semi-independent commission, but it was council members that appointed them, and then they could change them whenever they wanted if they weren't doing what they wanted. And you could talk to them. It wasn't illegal to talk to them. But if you talk to them, you just had to report it. Like, you just have to make a declaration that you talked to your member. So it wasn't independent at all. And so this new system will look really different. It'll be modeled on the best practices from the rest of the country and all of those learnings. So I think it should be hopefully better than what we have now.
Hi. Thank you for being here, first of all. I want to applaud you and the work that you're doing, which I think is really, really important. Here at the Temple, we used to have a very active homelessness task force. And that waned a little bit when Noah Farkas left to go join the Federation. But during that time, I thought I understood that you mentioned LASSO, right? And in one of your other answers, you sort of alluded to this is the city's issue, this is the county's issue, stuff like that. I thought LASA's purpose was to alleviate all that intra-government stuff that goes on.
Yeah.
No?
It sort of. It was meant to be a coordinate. I mean, it's designed to be an agency that's supposed to take dollars from the city and the county. Like the city gets money from the federal government, right, through HUD. The county gets money from the state and from the federal government. And LASA was a way to pool all of those dollars and to really build out the most effective system possible, right? LASA has not been well managed historically. It really has not. And it has been frustratingly opaque to outsiders. And in fact, there was open hostility between the leadership of LASA and accountability from elected representatives at the city. And that conflict, I think, came out of everyone's best intentions. So I don't want to malign anybody. LASA thought its work was to make sure that it could care for people who were on the street and move them indoors when they had shelter available. And they saw elected officials as being aggressive in trying to get rid of people on the street. And elected officials said, we're spending taxpayer dollars on this, and I want these issues to be resolved. I want people to get indoors. I care about the people who are homeless. I also care about my house residents who, pay a lot in taxes, don't want to live around people who may have mental illness or whatever it is, right? And so there was this tension that played out for a long time and further eroded LASA's accountability to the public. That's different now. There's new leadership there, and she's much more willing to work with elected officials, wants to be more accountable, is building out her data team. And in fact, the data that I've shared, some of the data that I shared with you about vacancy rates and how long it takes to get somebody indoors, all of that is only available now because of her willingness to make it available, right? So, there's a push now in the city of Los Angeles to actually take that contracting out of LASA and to do it directly from the city, right? To say, we need more accountability for our dollars, so let's do it from the city. People have asked me how I feel about that, and I will say I am agnostic about where we do the contracting as long as we're able to hold our service providers accountable for outcomes. So I think if we can get there, if we can do that work to actually say how many beds are vacant, who's coming to talk to that individual, how many people is each outreach worker talking to, not just throwing a bottle of water at, but really case managing. If we can get that kind of accountability from the system that we have, and all of the tools to get it are there. And if we can get there, then it shouldn't matter where the contracting is happening from, right? We'll be able to say, this provider's not doing their job, this program is not working, let's move the funds and make it work better. So that's my hope.
Hi.
One there and then we can.
There was an article in the LA Times, I think, about redoing office buildings to create dormitory-style housing. Is that under consideration?
Yes, absolutely. And there's office space use has changed, maybe permanently post-pandemic, right? There is a big vacancy rates across commercial spaces and across office spaces. The biggest vacancy rates are in downtown LA. Downtown LA has seen really big drops. I'm happy to say Ventura Boulevard actually has some of the higher occupancy rates. I think partly because it's a more smaller. The businesses here are different from the ones that we see in downtown LA. But yes, this is definitely something that is a potential idea to build more housing without having to do a lot of new construction, right? And so we have a new ordinance that's moving forward. It's called adaptive reuse. So adaptive reuse, it's exactly what it sounds like. You take an existing building, you adapt it to a new use, and you make it into something that's more needed than what the original use was. There's a couple of problems with adaptive reuse, though. There was a great article in the New York Times recently about the costs of converting office buildings into housing. It can be sometimes more expensive per square foot to do a building conversion than to just build new housing from the bottom up. And it often is not worth it, especially when you want units to have light and you want to be able to access certain kinds of plumbing requirements. So all of that becomes very expensive, and it's very different between offices and residential spaces. So it's very expensive, so it's not applicable for all office buildings, but I'm very excited to see which ones can be converted and to help support that conversion.
They talked about the outer offices being individual rooms, and then the inner areas being the communal bathrooms and like dormitory style, which would mean rethinking the housing.
Right. Yeah. Well, send me the article. I'd love to see it. I haven't seen the one about dormitory style, but it's something that I've studied and I'm excited about.
Hi, as a voter in your district, I have a question that isn't exactly on this topic. In 2019, we had 2 people come from the streets department to repave our street because there were holes. It's a residential area. The street needed repaving. Other streets around us have been repaved once, 2, 3, 4 times, and nobody's come. How do we make that happen? Nobody showed up. 2 guys who were surveying the street. They surveyed it, and nothing happened. And we had holes so big that I went with a red marker because you could bust a tire from it. In Encino, up in the hills.
So the question, did everybody hear the question? It was about a pothole being so big on the street and repaving not happening. So just like taking a step back and looking at the street repaving process, Bureau of Street Services creates a hierarchy of streets that need repaving based on the quality of the street. And whenever I say that and people are frustrated about repaving, people say, well, you should come and see these potholes. And so I get it. I know that their hierarchy is not always what reflects residents' experiences of that street. But that's why Ricky can be useful for you and our office can be useful for you, because if the street has changed, particularly since they last surveyed it, and has gotten significantly worse, we can push it up the queue and hopefully get some fixes done. But we can also do spot fixes. Like if it's just a pothole, we're able to bring in a crew that can fix a pothole until the street can be repaved again fully. And so let us know. And Ricky, it's just ricky.angel@lacity.org. Or you can just Google our office, Council District 4, and call us, and we'll be able to take the complaint and we'll work on it. Yeah, it's, oh, there, Ricky's there with the, yeah, great.
Okay. You were talking about numbers of beds for the homeless. Now, the thing is, I remember reading a few years ago that a lot of the new homeless are families that couldn't make their rent.
Yeah.
And now whole families are out on the street. So when you talk about beds, how does that accommodate a family, a parent with their children? How does that work?
Yeah.
And are you looking to redistrict certain, like individual lots to make accommodations for a different kind of housing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have a different, because we want to make sure children are not on the street, the whole system is designed around, that's the most urgent thing, right? We do have a whole family shelter system that is designed around urgency for helping families. So if a family were to become homeless and call the 211 system, there is a number of family vouchers that they can use to go to a motel or hotel. And then there's also shelters that are utilized just for families. So I host a family site in my district on Riverside Drive. 26 families live there at any given time. It's actually very lovely. I encourage you to, if you ever want to volunteer, come out and visit it. It's really, really nice. And it's a lot of new migrants who are here, Ukrainians, a ton of Ukrainians who are here, who pass through that system, but also a lot of people who are, live from different neighborhoods in Los Angeles. They make a big effort to make sure that those kids can still go to the schools that they were going to, so they have a busing program. Some of those kids are in actually my kids' school, because it's the nearby walking school from there. So that's, it's been nice to see the integration of that site into the neighborhood. There are too few family beds, for sure, family rooms, but I will say that the system tries very, very hard not to let a family live on the street. And if you look across the entire system, the people who are on the street are usually not people with children. They are single adults, whether they're males or females, are usually single adults or couples. And one thing that we have seen is that families tend to seek out resources before they're actually living on the street in a tent, because they want to keep their children indoors, right? And so our office is really trying to engage to make sure if you're at risk of eviction and you're a family, we're trying to keep you in that house. If you call us and you're living out of your car, we're going to get you in a hotel. If you call us and you are living in your friend's garage, which is what a lot of people are doing, they're living on a friend's living room or in a garage, that's when we're really trying to get people the help they need before they end up on a tent on the street. I think we can do a lot better on that system, but there is a lot of attention paid to families specifically.
Okay, I know it's late, so I'm going to make this quick. I'm one of your constituents from Studio City. There are two apartment buildings, permanent apartment buildings, proposed on Moore Park. One is 102 units, one is 52 units, with no parking allowed. I mean, no parking
Included.
Yeah. So how
are
is
they
that legal? I mean, what kind of impact is that going to have for our little neighborhood?
Are they ED1 buildings? Are they Executive Directive 1 buildings?
Oh, I don't know. I have pictures of them. I can tell. But there's no parking in.
Yeah. So there's been a new program by the mayor. Do you guys know about Executive Directive 1 or ED1? So if there's absolutely no parking included in the buildings, they may be ED1 buildings. So I'm going to talk about parking and the cost of housing, and then I'll talk about ED1, and then talk to you about what can happen in those buildings. So. Yes, sure. So overall, parking, requirements for parking in buildings has driven up the cost of housing a lot, of new construction, right? So we had rules in California that mandated 2 parking spots for apartments being built, or city rules that mandated that. And as a result of that, each parking spot, to build a parking spot in a building, can add $50,000 to the cost of that unit, right, so of each individual unit. And so in order to generate more units, particularly in areas where there's more transit accessibility, where there's bus or train stops, the city and the state have put in new regulations that have decreased parking requirements, usually not eliminated them entirely, but decreased parking requirements. So decreased parking requirements in places to try and generate more housing. And that has worked. I just want to say that's an effort that has worked. There has been more units built because we've reduced the parking requirements from 2 to 1 in these buildings, or just generally mandated that the number of parking spots needed is reduced. Executive Directive 1 was an effort to try and build more affordable housing, 100% affordable housing, using no public financing. So no government dollars are being spent in it. The program just said, if you propose a 100% affordable unit, you can get your permits within 30 days. Usually it takes 6 months to a year plus for a multifamily unit, right? So you'll get your permits within 30 days, and you don't have to do a lot of the things that we ask a lot of apartment builders to do, like provide parking, do things with sidewalks, to do things with street repairs. And ED1 has generated a lot of new construction as a result of the lowering of costs because of the entitlement process being changed and because the permitting time has gone down. For these specific units, have you talked to somebody in our office already about it? What we are sometimes able to do, even if the buildings are legally allowed under this program, right? It's a citywide program. I cannot step in and say, you can't build this. But what I can do is what I always do with every developer, whether it is something that's more under my control or not, which is to talk to the developer and say, hey, are there ways in which this project could be better for the neighborhood? And can you help us, like, put a few spots in, or make this better, or leave these trees in place, or, you know, put your ingress and egress point not on this little tiny side street, but onto the main street so that it doesn't impact the residents who live on this tiny side street. So there's ways in which we can still push the developer to do more. And if there's any way that we can do that, I promise that we will do that for these buildings as well. So please reach out to our office and we'll help. We'll try and help.
And with that, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us today.
Thank you all so much.
One, I think we really appreciated the opportunity to meet you.
Yeah.
And get to know you a little better. We really haven't seen you here.
I have come.
Yeah?
I've come multiple times.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I
to
was
really,
supposed to come last year.
yes, I know. We had to
Yes.
reschedule to
Yes,
today.
yes.
And to really delve into the homelessness issue. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.